Welcome, everybody, to a new episode 2 of Peering at Things on the Troubadour channel. My name is Kirk Barbera, and I have co-host Jeff Britting.
How do you do?
And since this is our episode 2, why don't you tell us a little bit about what this show is?
Absolutely. Peering at Things is a video podcast that examines real objects. And no zeros and ones. We basically probe connections to culture, art, and life.
And today, and each episode is going to be a different thing we're going to peer at. And just to give you a teaser about what we're going to be talking about today, actually, why don't you tell them the kind of theme of today?
Sure. Well, the theme is the writer's process. And we're going to start with examining a few things about historic writers in world literature, and what they did to get into their day. But then we're going to examine more closely a manuscript page and the process behind that page.
Yeah. So
author
of, so just so you know, Jeff Britting was very critical in the development of the Ayn Rand Archives.
That's right.
He worked with the Ayn Rand materials for 25 years. And so we're going to give you a little sneak peek at something that isn't shown very often, as far as I understand, from those archives and a piece of that. And you can find this online, but we're going to show it here.
Absolutely.
It's on the website for the Ayn Rand Institute. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's this manuscript page that we're going to take a look at is actually embedded in an online exhibit, which is available at AynRand.org.
And I'll put links in that so people can explore more, because there's other pieces of this. Okay, so let's hop into this sucker.
The writers of the world. What they did.
And it's really important, I think, even if you're not a writer. Although Troubadour does, I think there are a lot of writers, and there are hopefully a lot of literary readers in this. And I think even if you're not a writer, it's really interesting to see the day of a very fantastically creative, productive person. And that's what we're going to look at. This is actually a PDF, an image I'm going to pop up here that is actually, it's been around for a while. It's kind of famous in a way, like it's popular online. And let's pop it up here. And that's this, the day in the life. I don't think it's every day of their whole 50, 60, 70 years that they lived, but it's a creative day in the life of very famous, world-renowned authors like Balzac and John Milton and Murakami and Voltaire and Benjamin Franklin, and of course, Victor Hugo. And I just want to point out a little bit about Victor Hugo's day, and we're going to jump into other writers that aren't on this, or three other writers at least that aren't on this. So we're going to talk about Ayn Rand, of course, and then we'll talk a little bit about our process. Right. And, I'm going to say, we didn't say this before, but I think we want to demystify the writing process. Would you say that's a big part?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's important, because part of my mission is I hear a lot of people tell me that, I have a story I want to write, but there's a feeling like you can't do it. Like there's a magical, mystical, even if you're a scientific person, you still think that it's somewhat magical to be able to write fiction, especially, right? It's like if you don't have the right prayer to the right muse god, you're not going to do it. You know what I mean? That's the feeling.
I agree.
Okay.
That feeling is something we really want to challenge today.
Yeah.
And it applies to all sorts of writing stories, writing nonfiction, writing books, writing poems, writing plays. If you can utter an English sentence that's clear, you can write.
Yeah, I agree with that. You at least have some ability. You may not be the greatest writer of all time, but it's there. And, I think we live in an amazing time where you can get your stuff out there, get it to a small niche of people, and really make an impact on people.
And if you're not great now, you can work at
and
becoming great.
Yeah. I mean, these guys weren't great. I want to talk about Benjamin Franklin in particular later as well. Okay, so let's just real quick, just so you get an idea. I think this is interesting. I hope you guys think this is interesting, of Victor Hugo's day. So for instance, Victor Hugo, unlike a lot of us, like I go to sleep pretty late now. He goes to sleep at I think 9:30. It looks like 9:30 or 10 p.m., which is early for me. I go to sleep at 12:30 or 1. Okay. Which is a problem. I used to go to sleep a lot earlier, but now I'm going to, it's like I went to sleep earlier when I saw this first. So it's inspiring me to go back
to revert.
To wake up earlier instead of 7:30 or something, which I'm waking up now. And he wakes up at
7:30 p.m.
No, like I wake up at 7:30 a.m. Yeah, I go to sleep at 10:30. Yeah, I'm a bear. I just go hibernate for a day.
Okay.
And he wakes up around, looks like 5:30 a.m. And then he does a little bit, here's the breakdown. I think he does a little bit of food and leisure. So it doesn't define exactly what that is. And then he goes into his writing. So this is something I've done, and we'll talk about this later. And then there's some mystery thing that he did. We don't know what he was doing during this mystery period. That was
the mystery period?
Of his day. So he had a mystery period of his day,
okay.
More food. And then he works out as long as I do. I work out for about 2 hours a day. So he works out 2 hours a day. I wish I knew what he did, what kind of workout he did.
So he actually exercised?
That's what it says. Exercise. Yeah. I think it looks like around, if I'm doing this correctly, 1 to 3 or so.
Wow.
So
okay.
That's what I do.
All right.
At least 2 hours. And then some more mystery time. And then eating, a lot of eating, which I do that too. Come on, I'm on my way to Victor Hugo. That's my goal.
Well, I understand that he had a real appetite for food, Victor Hugo.
Just food?
Yeah, food and the other pleasures of life.
Okay. All right. We'll leave it at that. We'll keep it PG. And then he did another 2 hours of work, a lot more eating, and then he went to sleep.
Okay.
So that's his day. And we'll put this online as well. So if you go to troubadourmag.com, we'll put this PDF up there so you can see the images. And it's interesting to see all these different writers. We have Darwin on here and Mozart even. Mm-hmm. So whoever put this together is awesome. Okay, so we're going to jump into now something special.
Yeah.
You want to kind of...
Well, I think it's interesting to talk about a writer like Ayn Rand.
So they're now seeing this
after
clip.
Victor Hugo. Victor Hugo wrote in different locations throughout France, and Ayn Rand wrote in the area, the vicinity of that clip, which we really should play again because I'm going to spin this out a little.
Okay.
Bit. Yeah. Actually, the inspiration for the Ayn Rand Archives in part came from...
so this is a 1940s clip.
This is a 1940s clip of the area in the San Fernando Valley where she was living at the time that she wrote the first pages of Atlas Shrugged.
Sure.
And if we cut to the front of the house, we can take a look at what the exterior. There you go. So this was off one of those roads. This was off of Tampa Boulevard.
So the road we were just looking at is one road one may take
adjacent
to her house.
Yeah, it's adjacent.
She probably didn't take that house.
No.
She probably has once in her life, though.
She didn't.
Maybe.
You mean take that road?
Yeah, she might have.
Possibly. She spent a lot of time in her house writing. It was her husband. It would have been he was the driver. So, yeah. But the idea for an Ayn Rand Archives actually came from the a visit by Cynthia Peikoff to the Victor Hugo's home in Paris, and that was an inciting incident into the envisioning of a place where you could go and explore the experience of an author and their environment and their process through the artifacts and manuscripts that were generated in that location. So if you go we're jumping now from the Victor Hugo home in Paris to Chatsworth, California, a very famous home constructed by Richard Neutra.
Which is this guy here.
For the,
right here in the center.
Director Joseph von Sternberg. And this home was where Ayn Rand had her own writing studio. And you can actually show a picture of that. So on this desk, which was actually a piece of furniture purchased by her husband in the
he purchased it? I thought he built it.
No.
Okay,
He didn't design. He actually got it from a Studio Expendable company, which is one of those companies that manufacture in Hollywood items for production offices. And so this was one of those desks.
Yeah.
And it's a pedestal desk. It has some really interesting hardware on it. It's a 20th century design.
So does pedestal mean you can raise it and lower it easily?
No, it's two wooden boxes that are supporting a flat surface.
That's it. Okay.
So that what we're looking at here is her desk that she basically occupied for the duration of her creative life up to the last couple of years, because this desk, although it moved, does, probably a dozen different locations over the course of her writing career. At a certain point in her later life, her actual study became so cramped with work, papers, boxes, clippings, manuscripts, that she had to start writing outside of her office and went onto the dining table. And actually the last writing that she did of fiction, which was a teleplay for a television version of Atlas Shrugged, was written on her dining room table.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, because I know she took that desk to New York City.
Yep.
That's where she spent her last years, correct?
Right.
In New York City. But with, if I understand the story correctly, with some of the earnings from the movie The Fountainhead,
Correct.
She bought that house that we were looking at.
Yes.
And, then she got the desk.
Yeah,
and she had,
right.
But she had, so she wrote The Fountainhead and other books elsewhere.
Right.
Right. This is like after she made her success in a
But
way.
what's interesting is that this space, which
she wrote
is
her magnum opus on
celebrated, architecturally, speaking, it's a celebrated
this.
space.
Pop it back up.
Unfortunately, it no longer exists, but it's a space that for her provided the kind of quiet that she needed, and for the concentration that was a part of her day. She got up in the morning early, had her coffee, had a cigarette, and then went straight to work. And her ideal of working was unencumbered work time through to the end of the day, through to dinner. Interruptions such as meetings and secretarial work and that sort of thing were a drain, were a diversion. And she wanted that unstructured time in order to flow.
Yeah.
And part of what we're going to talk about today is the writer flow, is the writer process, is what is involved in taking things that you observe in life, converting them into ideas that you then express in language, on paper, and then turn into literary work.
Yeah, and so why don't we talk a little bit more about her day?
Yep.
And then we can kind of pull out from there.
Her day I pretty much said, but what about her process?
Well, I could say her process. Well, let me, if it's okay, I'd be curious about her day before all of this. Do you know more? So, did she have the same kind of day? Because let me.
Oh, you mean before all of what?
All of the financial success.
Oh,
so.
Oh no! Let me give you an example. I mean,
what you just described was after the financial
after
success.
In her early years when she was had just come to the United States, her dominant interest was in moving from the East Coast to the West Coast to pursue work in the entertainment industry, particularly in the movie industry, where she anticipated that she might be able to work in the silent film industry at the time, writing title cards for silent films, in which case she wouldn't have to command the level of English that she would later need in writing, full-blown stories. So that was her first stage in her process. She came out here, she got a job intermittently doing that kind of work, but probably her major source of income for the time up to the writing and completion of her first successful novel, We the Living, or her first novel rather, We the Living, was spent being a wardrobe supervisor.
Yes.
At a local studio, at RKO Studios. And that was an extremely long day, demanding, lots of paperwork, lots of objects to peer at and to take care of and to fit. Yeah. So she was basically in the middle of a extremely busy production process, which left very little time during the day for any thought other than thought of making sure this rack of wardrobe got to that soundstage correctly paired with the actors who were trooping in and out, so forth. It was really hard for her to write during that time. But as she has explained, in letters that we've looked at from her to her relatives, kind of explaining what was going on in her mind during this time when she was just barely, making ends meet during the Depression, keeping a precious job going, a studio job. It was very difficult. And I've been told by people that she actually would come home and cry.
I was going to say that too, because I heard that
at the end of the day, or at the
Which
top
is something
of
you
the
don't think
day.
about with Ayn Rand.
Well, she was really frustrated that, here she had all of this in her. She knew what, she was facing in terms of her creative life, and to be encumbered by a necessary job to pay the rent and to keep things going, and to pull all of her resources and direct them toward that end rather than the manuscript that was lying on that desk and growing page by page at a very slow rate was very frustrating for her.
Yeah, so this was and she went through the depression too. So that's where this is happening, correct?
Right.
Some of this is through the depression. Her husband,
well, all of this is through the depression.
Yeah, so she wrote The Fountainhead in the depression.
No, she wrote she's writing We the Living at the time.
Okay, so in the depression's We the Living.
Yeah. So at the time that she was, working on other people's stories, essentially working on the production process for other people's films, she was laboring over her first novel and doing it at a very slow pace.
How old was she when she published We the Living finally?
She was in her, let's see, let me do the math.
Late 20s?
I don't do well with numbers.
Okay, that's fine.
It's like in her
when was it published?
Late 20s, early 30s. It was published in 1936.
36.
Yeah. So
she was 31. Right? Am I doing the math right? 1905, 36 minus 1. So I think 31. Okay, so I'm 3 years behind her.
I don't have my calculator.
but
wait a minute. Don't compare yourself. No. Let's. I want to land. I want to jump on that one.
That's fine.
Because the one thing that is really important.
I wrote a novel. I just haven't published it.
You need to.
Probably not as
you
good as
need to pay attention to you.
Yeah.
You and your time schedule and your process. Because you can't compare it. No.
Well, it's a good segue because, there's a lot of differences. Like I've had a podcast for 5 years. Ayn Rand never had a podcast for 5 years, right? So she didn't have, I've self-published on blogs my own short fiction for years, right? She hasn't had that ability, obviously.
Right.
So there's a lot of differences. She was able to be in movies. I'm not able to be in movies, in the way that she was in terms of Hollywood, but it was also really early years in Hollywood when it was a little bit easier to get into it, right? You didn't have to get into a guild and like she walked off a lot and a big time director thought her eyes looked interesting and she got a job.
Well, just look at it this way. That was a story about, that was Cecil B. DeMille that discovered her and hired her as an extra because he found her interesting and peering at him as she was leaving a job interview with his production company in Culver City, and she was observed looking at him go by and parked in his Roadster, and he asked her to hop in. Asked her where
can't do that anymore.
What she why are you here? And well, I'm here to learn about the movies and write for them. And he says, well, if you want to write for the movies, better learn how they're made. Yeah. So he took her on the lot and took her on a tour of the
King of Kings,
set,
and
which
that's where she met her husband, and all these great things.
But the thing of it is that if you go back 10 years from that time, less than 10 years, in terms of where the film industry was at.
Well, super early.
Yeah. So it's like podcasting now. So this guy is the future.
Yeah.
Sam Goldwyn.
I've done an article for it's on the Foundation of Economic Education, fee.com or whatever. So I did one relating what it would be like if Ayn Rand was born in 1985 in terms of technology and how, like she would have gotten a Windows 95 when she was 10 years old, maybe, if she was lucky, like if we just assume, right? So, and she would have gotten on the internet, maybe done YouTube videos early 2000s, right? Like how, the equivalent of what she did back then. I kind of try to it's very imaginative. It's obviously not real, but what would her life have been like were she born exactly as her own character?
Right. But you need to realize that you're at, with all of this are probably at the point, somewhere between the Nickelodeon and the first jump cut.
Well, that's the point I made in the article is that a lot of people
in the late teens
it's hard to sometimes imagine how, I'll put a link to that article because there's a graphic I used to show step by step, like she was doing this and this was happening in the film industry, and it was silent. It's the film industry. The first, film was like 1897 and this was like 1910. So it's like, 13 years the film is like moving pictures have existed, and they're just like guys boxing, right? It's just like getting girls twirling around, like that's the famous thing, right? So it's similar to what we're having now, where we're just in this space, we're just getting a little bit of a taste.
Yeah, we're starting to box. We're at least trying to box verbally, here, right?
Yeah. Well, that other people have done that quite well for a while, but what we're
you
doing,
know what they don't have.
We're
peering at things through our eyes, and we are completely different from anyone else that you'll ever see.
Oh, for sure. And to kind of bring it back to the writing process. Yeah. So one thing I was curious about, and I agree, like it's definitely, one of our goals is to demystify the writing process, to make it. This is one of the things that I fell in love with Ayn Rand and her lecture, and that was turned into a book, The Art of Not Fiction. I think in The Art of Fiction and the stuff she's done with the subconscious and demystifying the subconscious, especially for fiction writers, is unparalleled. I've read many books by authors about the writing process, the normal ones like the Stephen King one, and writers who have written about screenwriting and so on. A lot of these, and there's always an element where at some point, I'm trying to remember the guy who wrote The Gates of Fire. So there's a book called The War of Art, and it's all about Stephen Pressfield, and it's all about how there's almost a kind of mystical muse that you have to, you light certain candles, you do a certain circle dance and a prayer, and then you sit down to write, and then maybe if the muse hits you, that it'll work. And why I was showing, the daily creativity of writers is that they sit down and write even if they're not inspired, for one, and then two, there's what Ayn Rand I think does is she kind of unlocks the potential of how your subconscious or your mind really works.
Let me talk a little historically about that, because I think it's interesting. Ayn Rand was literarily oriented as a child. She was interested in reading, and she in fact taught herself to read, and she was read to by her, or rather, she listened to her mother reading to her grandmother in French, and so there was several languages, exposure to world literature. She was living in a pretty cosmopolitan Russian city, St. Petersburg, at the time. But literary in orientation, interested in books, but also very, and this is a foundation. This precedes probably everything. She looked out around her and asked questions about things and observed and discriminated things in her field of awareness, her visual frame. I mean, using kind of a film metaphor. And it wasn't just passive question, or it wasn't just a passive, inventory of what was out there, but there was also, after finding out what those things were, there was another step in the process, and that was selecting things that were important to her or interesting to her, and gathering those things, like you do in the course of your day, looking at things that come in and out of your zone as a child, people, events, conversations, objects that might be in the home that come in and come out, and figuring out what it is about each one of those experiences that you like. And that was something that was
very
unique,
critical, in a
well, she was
way.
very discerning.
But okay, that's maybe a better word. But what I mean is, like, I think many people in general, might have a block for, say, critically looking at someone who's close to you, right? Like, you're supposed to just assume, and because I'm trying to get at what you're saying about how she observed the world. She had a very unique, personal way of observing the world, which comes out in her mature, or all of her writing throughout her life.
Well,
even early Ayn Rand.
What's so unique is, at least in my experience with the study of her work, is that at the root of her action is some connection to her, is something that is important to her, is some connection
But
that
I mean,
she's making.
what I'm trying to differentiate is that a lot of people think that things are personal to them. And it's very difficult to actually differentiate between someone else's impact on you and kind of taking on their perceptions as your own and doing it for yourself. And I think she does it for herself. And one way she does it is that there's nothing that's not open to criticism or analysis or discussion or tinkering with why is it like this, right? So even someone like, well, why is my mother the way she is, right? Why is my sister the way she is? A lot of times our answer might be that's just the way they are, and we just stop thinking. But Ayn Rand is the type of person who really investigates and looks at and parses out the character of the people around her.
Yes, and because she was primarily, I think, interested in people and their characters, and she had picked out certain character types that she found appealing and wanted to, involve herself with or be proximate to, that she, as a young person, aware of literature, made another very significant discovery, and that was that she herself could, in assuming the mantle of writer, in creating stories, could populate those stories with depictions of the kind of character traits that she found valuable in the people that she met, but with one very important distinction.
Okay.
That being that she could at will revisit those character traits at any point.
Yeah.
Because she had
integrated them herself.
No. She had turned them into a story that was objective, that was in print, that was something that she could then, in language, go back and revisit. That is an important.
Okay, so the actual writing, like taking notes, and there's the Ayn Rand journal I love, and kind of seeing her thoughts over time. You can see somewhat clearly how she thought on paper, and you could write it down and look at.
Yeah, that's true. But the thing of it is, as a person, as a young child of 8.5 or 9, she discovered that she wanted to be a writer because she could essentially make it possible to revisit and enjoy the things that she only imperfectly encountered in life. I mean, if an interesting relative came over, if an interesting person came into her life, if an interesting event occurred outside of her window, she was only there as a recipient of this. She had no control over that.
So let's talk about the writing process in that. So one of the things I liked about, I've seen in her writing, even in nonfiction.
That is the process.
That's what I'm saying, yes. And what I mean, though, is if you read her work, you'll see, even in her nonfiction, like what she wrote about Mr. X, right? Where she really describes his face, the face of this person.
Now, Mr. X, explain what Mr. X is.
So Mr. X is from a nonfiction work that I don't remember which one it was. Is it like the most tragic face in the world? Or is it the... I can't remember which essay it's from. Do you remember?
Well, it's an essay in the Romantic Manifesto.
Manifesto. Okay,
it's describing an individual who is torn between the art that he sees and admires and its application or re-experience in the course of his life.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make is that and I've seen her also describe political figures, their faces. And what I'm talking about is just how she writes concretely about their faces and how that talks about, or how that expresses their personality, right? And how she's able to evaluate and really dig in. And I think she's, just like a lot of great literary writers, like Victor Hugo, are amazing at and Dostoevsky at psychology. And part of how they express this is not just an inner monologue. It's also like in how the person moves, how they look, their face.
I mean,
this is the writing process that I'm just parsing out what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree with you.
I mean, but the foundation for that is looking out at the world.
That's my point.
Is looking at things, is peering at things very deeply,
yes.
and having a tremendous reserve of experiences in yourself from a very early age on, that you don't necessarily linger over upon encountering that thing or that experience. you just tuck it away in your head.
Well, let me give you another
in your
example.
Subconscious.
Yeah, I 100% agree. But what I'm trying to get at for the viewer is a lot of people think they're doing this, but they're not. So one of the very good pieces of advice in The Art of Fiction is never say about a character, that he's strong, independent, whatever, right? And don't just have that said about the character. That's how a lot of people would, like for instance, it's infamous how bad objectivist writers are, and in terms of fiction. And one of the reason is because I think they just kind of copy, and I do this. It's one of the things you have to kind of write out of you in a sense, because Rand has had such an impact on me. But what you have is, this strong, upright man walks into a room, and this.
But that's a little different from what you're saying. I mean, it seems like you were talking about.
But what I'm talking about is
the telling detail and its importance as in your writer's toolkit versus taking on a persona that is really not authentic to you.
No, but what I'm saying is it's not clear to people that they're not doing that, and part of that is. Because like when you read someone's work and you're like, you're reading like I get people emailing me work and I'm like, okay, there might be something here, but you really need to like look at this scene. So for instance, I won't mention anybody, but I just got a piece for Troubadour magazine. Somebody submitted something, and again, I see this all the time. And what I saw was, okay, here's a pivotal scene where these two characters are supposed to fall in love. And it's basically, written, it's a show versus tell thing. And it's like, oh, they're riding here, they fall in love, they kiss a little bit, and then that's it. And I'm like, you need to draw that out. You need to really express what that is. And the writer's mind, that writer thought that writer, I'm not going to say the gender, was doing exactly what you're saying, which is, pointing, oh, but this is a love scene. And they just kind of say these couple words, and it's an intense love scene between these two characters. But they don't have the ability to concretize. And that's what I'm trying to get at when you're saying Rand was able to look out in the world and peer at things. She was able to, she would be able to concretize all of her abstractions it's one of her I think a big, like, objectivism is fundamentally a process, the philosophy. That's why she labeled it based off of epistemology, right? And as far as I understand.
I think the writer's process depends on a fully loaded brain, memory, subconscious of facts about the world, experiences about the world.
Yes.
Distinctions made between objects in the world, and the flood of experience that a young person would have and ought to have to build up a fund that's going to supply you at a later point with imagery, concreteness that will communicate a point. That is absolutely essential. And that's something that appears to be a part of what we know of Ayn Rand's development. And I think it's also true of the development of any effective writer.
100%. I think people underestimate that they're not doing that, and that takes conscious effort, not just age. Like, you have to consciously, and this is, part of the writing process, taking notes and journaling about, you see a movie, why does that character make that impact on you? If this character is heroic, why is it a hero? Like, why is John Wayne, look the way he does, move the way he does, versus how Clint Eastwood moves and looks and does. And, writing down the curl of his lip and the eyebrow movement and the saunter that he has and things of that nature to kind of give you that storehouse of material that you can then go, and when you write, the analogy I think of is you're trying to create a stream from the ocean of your subconscious based on all the observations you've made.
Yeah, I mean,
into like through your finger onto the page.
I think, if I understand you correctly, it might be the case that a lot of people of whatever persuasion short shrift the value of observation and of keen observation.
This is why romantic poetry in particular, but all romantic literature is something I'm passionate about for Troubadour magazine. And, just to give you an example about Wordsworth, right? So when Wordsworth was trying to make some money in his 30s, he was a travel blogger, basically. And I've mentioned this on another show, but I think it's really useful to understand what was a massive shift in the way that people perceived the world that was Romanticism. And I think that Rand was picking up on. And when he was hired to write like a travelogue about, like a travel blog or like a book for people coming to visit the Lake District where he lived, like a lot of writers, he ended up writing basically a manifesto against all the other travel writers. So he did write like, okay, because you're supposed to write, like, for a travel blog, you're supposed to like go here, look at this destination, look at this waterfall, look at this lake, go, because they didn't have GPS and all that stuff, obviously. But what he ended up doing was he did some of that, and then he also attacked this whole genre of how people were writing this, and he said they're all wrong.
And that genre being the preceding genre
of travelogues, of writing travel, books.
But in a non-romantic style?
No. So, what do you mean?
Well, I thought you were illustrating.
So I'm gonna talk about one of his most interesting passages is about waterfalls that I think illustrates this.
Okay.
And again, it's about looking. It's about peering at a waterfall. So before him, and what a lot of people would do is they had this preconceived notion, a rationalistic notion of what's beautiful about a waterfall. And this is how all travel writers would write. And what's beautiful about a waterfall pre-Wordsworth was its grandeur. If it's big and powerful, like the Niagara Falls, right? Like that's a beautiful waterfall. That's what beauty is. It's grandeur and size. And he said, no. That may be one part of it, but you have to watch what if someone comes at a time before a snow melt and it's actually much calmer. And he talks about like the way you need to look at nature is observe it for what it is and come up with the beauty in a natural moment. So for instance, there may be a moment when it's a very, light waterfall, and the lake is calm. And when you look at it, it's actually, it's like one of those pictures we love today that you take a picture of a lake and it reflects the mountain and the sky above it. And it's like this pristine calm. And he talks about it in that kind of concrete detail about, the stream can reflect the waterfall. It's a much more, droplets coming down from the sky type thing. And the point is that it's not a preconceived notion that grandeur, power, a big flow, that's what beauty is for waterfalls. And he says that this is how you look at all of reality, not just waterfalls, like everything.
So he's advocating a fresh perspective.
Yeah, and based on your own looking at it. So like
as opposed to
preconceived notion
that were the currency of the time. It was in the air at the time.
That's what Romanticism was a rejection of.
That's why I asked you.
Yes.
What was it rejecting?
It was rejecting that kind of preconceived rationalistic.
Was that given a name?
Like classicism?
Okay.
So it's not just classicism. I mean, there was a certain view of what reason was, which was kind of passed down by greater people before you. Like you go from Aristotle and Plato to Shakespeare and Milton, and they had the storehouse, and that's what beauty was. And they basically everybody's just kind of riffing off of that in their own way. Wordsworth said, no. This is why if you read Wordsworth poetry, there's not a lot of, and he was the first romantic. So he kicked off what we would call the romantic movement, especially in England. And he comes 40 years before Hugo and all those guys. And he was saying, no, reason is him and Coleridge looking out at the world and kind of integrating the observation, the things your eyes see, your senses, and integrating into something bigger. So my point is that that's the kind of thing that Ayn Rand was even better at in her own sense. Like on a grand, like she learned from these romantics and she observed the world that way, and that's how she took that method for writing and built that into.
Then the magnitude of her, you compared her as being greater than what was
or equal, like in the romantic vein.
Oh, okay.
So the vein of looking out at reality for yourself, integrating what you see with your senses, all five of your senses, and bringing that into your own kind of world. So I think that's what a big part of her writing process was.
Well, it's a foundation. And that, I mean, you can spend the whole of your life looking at things and looking at things closely and end up being a scientist rather than a creative writer.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So, what is it about being a creative writer that is, what gives people that motivation? Why do people get involved in writing sentences about fictional experiences and activities and people and characters? Why does that become important for people?
Well, my take is, first off, that comes before science. So I believe literature and fictionalizing things come factual scientific knowledge and how we even develop knowledge. So in a sense, I think they're twins in a sense, right? Is that you have a scientist who observes and, just like you're saying, endlessly analyzes almost. Whereas a fiction writer is more obsessed with observing, analyzing, and then building a world of their own. Now, why does a scientist become a scientist and a, literary writer become a literary writer? I think that's sentiment, temperament, desire. I think you have to have, it depends on the era to some degree. Well, who might turn into that?
Why did you?
Well, for me, I always loved stories. And I think if you love stories a lot, so I'm not as obsessed. I had a person that I knew who taught science at a school I went to. He's awesome. I love him. But he was just the way he could become obsessed about a slug and classifying all slugs, things like that, which is cool. For me, just my temperament, I'm not interested in that type of classification of all these different slugs, right? But I'm interested. I'm not putting that down. When he looks at the moon, he looks at what are the stages of the moon.
Right.
For me, it's how does the moon reflect on the faces of two lovers who are about to break up? That's how I look at the moon. Why that happens psychologically, I think you have to go back to I have my Iliad story that I've told many times before. For me, that's what did it, I think. And then getting into Ayn Rand. But what about you? I don't know if people know. I've mentioned that Iliad story many times.
I'm not. I'll have to dial it up. I'm not familiar with the story.
Well, just real quick, I'll just tell you mine. So the Iliad story was I was 9 years old. I sucked at everything except baseball in school, except for reading. People said I was a good reader. I didn't know what that meant. I was 9. So I was told that the Iliad was the greatest book of all time. So I'm a good reader. I should be able to read this book. I go and make my dad buy the Iliad. And I start reading it and I'm crying every page. And the reason I'm crying, I make myself read every page of it, is not because it's so beautiful, but because I don't know what the hell they're talking about. So I'm like, something's wrong with me. I'm not even good even at this. And it became an obsession over time to understand that book, what was actually being told. I've read that book a dozen times, maybe. I've studied it over and over again. I've taken courses on it. So I've really wanted to get into understanding that. And that, I think, and I've always loved stories as well in terms of reading fiction. So that's the only thing I've really been passionate about. So what about you?
So the question is, how did I get started as a creative artist?
Why creative artist and not scientist or doctor?
Actually, I was tempted by medicine, and I grew up in a household that was deeply committed to health issues. My mother was an RN, my dad worked with the public health department, and I was completely exposed to those issues. And my parents, were socialized with nurses and doctors, and so I found that world fascinating. And I found it interesting to think of a world where you could speak universally about things using Latin as a way of communicating. Across. I thought that that was very intriguing. But as much as I found biology interesting and the systems within systems interesting, and the talk among my parents' medical friends interesting, I was always more interested in what people did outside of the laboratory, what they did outside of the hospital, what they did in action, and not only what they did, but how they looked when they did it, and what sounded when they did it. So, at the same time, I was exposed to literature, stories, on a childhood, on a child level, music on a really an adult level, and painting also too. That was another huge, experience, formative experience I had. So I was developing, preferences in painting, sculpture, music, and to a lesser extent, literature when I was very young, and was given the opportunity to start working in those art forms and actually do the kind of experimentation that would lead to cementing, oh, this is interesting, or this is for me, or this is not so much for me. And it just evolved out of that.
Yeah.
It was incredibly exciting to look at the world in this way and view it from the perspective of looking at work that had been created by others, and then anticipating a fresh start with the work that I was starting to do and in a small incremental way as a child. So
yeah,
it was enormously exciting. So that just I had a chance to find what my favorites were.
Yeah.
And put them together and to a hyphen which joined composing music and writing. And that's really that kind of combination of activities was really set by the time I was 16.
Yeah, I mean, so I think when you're talking about like what starts it, if you're talking about like what starts it with Ayn Rand and this manuscript from the archives, which we'll talk about in a second here. So it's like if you go back to Ayn Rand's early year, like childhood, she was drawing little pictures for her sisters and telling little stories with them, correct?
Well, she was
from beginning.
I mean, she was telling stories and looking at things out in the world, like a poster of dancers at a London review that she saw on a trip to England, and concocting scenarios involving those people represented in that poster, and creating and infusing them with the kind of values that she had already established that she liked and enjoyed about people that were coming in and out of her small world. And it was a chance for her to create her own, as I said earlier, her own form of what she liked, so she could have it available to her. She can go back and revisit it.
Yeah.
And enjoy it.
Yeah.
And develop, further instances of the kinds of values that she had already seen and selected as important in the world around her.
So a big part of the process is developing, to conclude that thought, is just the developing of the observational faculty and how you observe the world. And that's what Rand was really good at. She did that through the course of her life, just like all the effective writers that you put it. Now, in terms of getting into the nitty gritty of her process, so for instance, we have this manuscript that is what we're peering at today.
Right.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the manuscript?
Well, the manuscript is a page of work from an early version of Atlas Shrugged. The scene is one that plays out between Francisco d'Anconia and Hank Rearden. And Francisco, as a character, is trying to get Rearden to reconsider his sanction of the world that is destroying him. And
this is before the furnace blows up and they go throw that clay at it when they're together, and this is like the Atlas Shrugged line, right?
Yeah, this is where
moment, when they're sitting together in his office.
Francisco is the bearer of a number of observations. He brings the world concretely to a keen summary, and that keen summary is the thing that he wants Rearden to acknowledge and then make a decision to pull away from. So he's using the metaphor of Atlas, who's holding the world on his shoulders.
Now, what would you do?
And what would you do if the world was was pressing down on you.
His
and
legs were buckling.
And oppressing you because it was undermining and your value by disregarding your value.
Yeah.
You know, it
was like a guilt thing, like putting it on you as a burden of guilt.
So, you know, this particular page, condenses, it enacts the challenge that Reardon faces through a summary. And, you know, the caution is, well, if Atlas is being oppressed by the world, by views and people that are trying to undermine Atlas should not sanction this any further. Atlas should shrug.
Yeah.
And so that's in this manuscript page. That's what we're seeing.
That's what we're looking at
playing
here.
out on the screen. Now, that particular page is a page that exists currently in a series of pages. There's the handwritten page. There's a version that went off to a secretary that was then retyped, and then another version was typed from that initial typing, and more editing was done, and then, you know, tiers and tiers of work that preceded handing the manuscript off to a publisher. And then from that point, there were many iterations of that one page that passed.
This is the interesting part of the process, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people might assume that in writing something like Atlas Shrugged or Fountainhead or even We the Living, it's just like, oh, she opened her eyes, she wrote pen to paper, sent it away, and it's done.
Oh, no, not
right?
at all. No.
And it's not like that at all. No, there's so much, just like sculpting, something from marble. There's a lot of, even when it's close to done, there's a lot of like chipping away to make it just perfect, the edging that he wants.
I mean,
and she's chipping away and changing little things throughout.
In the publishing stage of the novel, there were still minor adjustments made to key philosophic concepts, like the definition of logic. I mean, that changes slightly from an early typescript through the galley proofs of the penultimate manuscript.
But in terms of
publication,
the writing process, she starts everything. So this is one thing I took and I do now is from her. Is I write everything long form. Like I just write it out.
In longhand.
Longhand, thank you. So I take everything longhand. So my novel, it's now I'm actually in the process of rewriting it. So I wrote it once, did some edits. This was a couple years ago. Now I'm going to do it again and then go through editing with, instead of a publisher, I'm just going to hire an editor and do it myself versus how she did it, when she got accepted by a publisher. Today, it's a lot easier to just go hire an editor and just do it all yourself because the process is all out there. But anyway, the point is that I wrote every word of that by hand initially. And then, now it's all in a program, or I'm putting it into a program called Highland 2, which is a simple writer's app for compiling stuff like this. And, now I'm actually typing every word. And then as I do it, I sometimes take notes and put like little, changes. And it's actually changing quite a bit already. Like I'm in there was 10 chapters. Now it looks like there's going to be 20 or 30 because the chapters were super long. So,
there's
I'm just changing a lot
really
of stuff.
Important about
but everything was long form.
Taking an idea that you have, a situation, a story, a scene or dialogue or whatnot, and actually putting it down on paper in some form and then viewing it from one form to another, from a handwritten version of something in your situation to a type or printed version of that. There's a lot of shift of perspective that goes on in viewing things in different print forms or in different in inscribed forms that can really throw light on what you're doing and what you're developing. Yeah. I found that to be enormously helpful, oddly enough, in really short form writing for blogs or for Facebook and what have you, when I'm, the equivalent of an op-ed type of writing that I used to try to do, professionally. I was never really good at it. I would call it haiku. And
op-ed is hard.
And what I found, interestingly, when I had an idea that I wanted to focus on in terms of an op-ed type of statement, which I do frequently on Facebook, I do all the mulling all the thinking, all of the making sure that whatever the topic is, it was really personal to me, really passionate, something that I felt like I really wanted to punch and say something about. And then I would actually write it, not longhand and not at the typewriter, but I found that writing it in the notes application on my iPhone with my thumb.
Oh, okay.
And my finger.
Because you're slow.
And it was slow. And I realized that as I was, doling out these words, it was acting as a razor, and it was shortening things, it was tightening things simply by virtue of the fact that it was so hard to actually get something into this instrument. And I found that my writing became tighter, more clearer, more concrete, because I was spending less time gumming up the works, with long, verbose statements, sort of similar to how I speak sometimes, verbose.
Well,
and I found that like a tonic. It was like, wow, this can really cut through a lot of gunk and get to the essence of what I want to say. And then once it's down, in that document form for these short forms, then I can go back and I can edit it. Then I can take a look at it and I can extract it from the app and put it on my computer screen in a Word program and then really do the editing that I do normally. But it was such a great advantage to have that shift in perspective, because it gave me such a it was like an added I don't know, I took a writing vitamin or something with this app.
Well, I think for short form work, it's a little different, right? Like
yes,
you wouldn't
absolutely.
do that with a novel.
No, not for a long.
That would, although, so just as an example, I think journalists do dictate a lot, and then they either write it dictate, on a tape recorder, and sometimes they'll, if you're like the editor in chief or something, and you're in a hurry, you might dictate something, stop, period, like the Koch brother just died, period, and we're all happy, period, right? I don't know, and that's how and then they would pass that on to a secretary who would actually type it out. Yeah. Interestingly, a lot of Wordsworth's poems were dictated to his sister while they were walking, and then he would spend a lot of time tinkering with the words. And that's where I think the art comes in, and you can actually see some of this.
There's a great example of dictation that will complement this on a much longer form. I understand from a biography of Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, a philosopher that I read some years ago, when I was working actively on a libretto for an opera about his life, that Aquinas employed secretaries, monks, that would help him during the course of his day, and he dictated sometimes multiple works at the same time to different scribes who were assigned to one or another work. So he would turn to one, utter a passage, the scribe would then start to write it down and take the time to do so. Then he would turn his attention to another monk who was working on a completely different work and proceed with the next paragraph of that, and would just keep bouncing back and forth.
That's interesting.
Because he had so much to say, and he couldn't write he was actually deploying two people.
Well, writing was more difficult, like in terms of the process. Like it wasn't just pen and paper like we have.
Well,
like to actually physically write something.
In stone.
Well, I know that, but
he wrote,
but was it quills and paper at that time?
Yeah, there was paper.
1300s.
Yeah, paper and ink.
Papyrus still.
Well, that's 13 BC maybe in Egypt, but
okay, maybe I got it mixed up. But I thought they were so. For instance, I think like Aristotle would have been similar. I know a lot of what that we have of him are the equivalent of lecture notes.
That's right, from his students.
So right. So that's that's an interesting perspective.
I mean, there's and actually like there is something really interesting about that. I mean, if you think of the legacy that Ayn Rand left. And as any writer who is literary and philosophical in their professional work would leave, if it's intact, is that you have a, in the over the and if it's intact by someone who was a consistent saver of work, as Ayn Rand was, you have a marvelous debris field of the process
That's an interesting
of writing.
Yeah.
And it is not a complete recording of what went on, but it offers the scholar, the researcher, mosaic pieces that you can piece together to get an overall picture of what was going on, the development of a work and the development of works and the development of ideas that come out of those works have a very interesting flow from work to work, decade to decade, and the things that interested a writer like her in her 20s were different from the things that interested her in her 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And if you leave behind a trail of evidence that's fixed in some form that people can look at and peer at closely, there's a tremendous amount to be learned about the way that writer, in this case Ayn Rand, in my experience of 25 years, put together her work and succeeded in communicating the ideas and the dramas that became fixed in published form in the 4 novels that she wrote. But sometimes in the drafts that and the discarded pages, you'll see elements that are tied to other and completely different works.
Yeah. And
characters that were manifest in an early play that appear in some faint way in the Atlas, separated by several decades. That's a fascinating thing.
I mean, when you read the early Ayn Rand, for instance, you definitely get a sense of Randian characters already there, even though she hasn't even thought of Howard Roark and John Galt and Hank Rearden Francisco yet, or I was going to say Dagny Taggart, and basically all the characters. Like, even in her very early work, you do see glimmers of what you're talking about, I think, where it's there. And then in the manuscript, so in terms of her process, it seems like she has an idea for something. So why don't we talk about that, and then maybe finish off by talking about our process a little bit, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
So
the idea in this page is that idea of that bespeaks the theme of the book, which is very
but
tersely.
How does she get ideas for her?
Well, I'll tell you. The theme of the book is the mind on strike.
Yeah.
And as a corollary, the presentation of a new code of morality. But the idea for the novel was not generated in a note session at a empty writer's table on some dark and dusty night in the San Fernando Valley. It came out of a conversation that she had with a friend of hers at the tail end of the success of her publication of The Fountainhead, and she was on the phone with a friend who was encouraging her to take time to write out in a nonfiction form the ethical theory that was presented and
implicit in Fountainhead. It's not
implicit
explicit.
And explicit in the
Somewhat
actions.
explicit.
In the drama
sure.
of The Fountainhead.
I call that implicit.
And she said, my views are on morality, and my views on what the ideal man is in the character of Howard Roark, who's the main character of The Fountainhead, the hero of the book, are clear to anyone who reads the book. Why do I need to go and take it a step further to offer this thing? And there was this from her friend, this insistence, well, you owe it to them. And he said, why do I owe it to people? What if all the creative people who exist decided not to take on these burdens?
Yeah.
And what if we all went on strike?
What if the founder said, just pay the tax? Just Benjamin Franklin's like, we don't need to write any of this stuff, and Thomas Jefferson's like, I just want to have fun with my lady.
The pursuit of what?
Yeah, exactly.
It didn't.
If Mozart said, I just want to drink in a party.
Right. Well, it didn't work out that way, and so she said that would make a good novel. But she hung up on the phone, and then her husband, who was in the room at the time, he said, that would make a good novel. And so for the next period of time, her new novel and what became Atlas Shrugged was
it's like 13 years
was The Mind on Strike, and it was actually initially called The Strike.
Yeah. Well, I hope that people are getting a sense of one. Ayn Rand had this idea. It took her 13 years to develop. She wrote things by hand, and she would often have somebody else type it up. Right? Is that right?
Well, she did. Yeah, she had
someone else type it, and then she would work on it after that. She would edit it, and she was editing it all the changing things and improving things and having people read it, and they would give feedback sometimes, and always she was the central thinker in it all. But the point is that it wasn't just some kind of automatic, inspirational thing that she wrote down. There was a ton of development work. Back and forth, changing things.
Well, yeah,
and even in like the We the Living book.
But I want to emphasize one thing about this. It's not just, don't scare people off with that. I think you could possibly scare them off because there's several stages. Several stages.
You should be scared of Atlas Shrugged.
Several stages of the writing process. There's the, to really net it out, there's the pre-writing process.
Yes.
Whether you're dealing with, a 500 subject A essay at UC Berkeley or a 500-page novel.
It's the thinking.
It's the thinking what is relevant, what's important to you, and
so let's do stages real quick.
Yeah.
So pre-writing. Yeah. To some degree, you said this earlier. So if we synopsize this, we have the constant observation and develop. The putting into your mind and your subconscious lots of observations.
Right.
And conclusions.
That's
from today. If you're not doing that now, start today. And then when you want to work on like the Atlas Shrugged, like this manuscript, the next thing is then pre-writing. So she got this idea, and now talk about the pre-writing really quickly so we can move on to the next stage.
Well, the pre-writing is notes, outlines,
thoughts, just random, like just mind dump in a sense.
But in a very specific way. It's not just Well,
sometimes you might just
standing at the square in London and shooting off your lip. In effect, it's taking the focus the subject that you're thinking about and narrowing it and outlining and seeing where the widest contours of the work is.
Like she had characters for a priest that she cut, that she had outlined.
I think is that
in 5 minutes?
I think that is true of Atlas. I don't know when that particular character arose and fell, but the point of it is that you have to get some very essential actions down before you populate your world with lots of
you need to know beginning, middle, end in the broad strokes, which you can't just use in your head. You can't just imagine it in your mind. You need to get it on paper.
Right.
So that's a big part of the pre-writing
and
process.
even if one of those broad stroked sections is not fully clear in your head, even having a holding place.
Sometimes it'll never be clear until you write it down.
That's true, but you need to have
some kind of
stepping stones, across this.
Yeah, so you want to have notes on characters, plot, setting, theme.
But whatever, but not because
it doesn't have to be like that exactly.
It's not like Kirk's inventory of necessary things that you need to have before you start the writing process. Got to have character. Boom, boom, boom. Got to have. It's more fluid than that. Because it's not like we're giving you a cheat sheet of things that you have to come up with.
Well, let me just... Okay,
you have to come up with the things that motivate you to stick with the process. And if at the very minimum, you need to have a theme and you need to have some dramatic event which expresses that in terms of a conflict.
So, I mean, there are writers who would talk about you shouldn't start with a theme, actually. So Ayn Rand is, I think, unique in that as a writer, that you would start or have as a theme. Now, she had a plot event that was her starting point, which is creative people going on strike. That's an action, right? Is they all say, what if the founding fathers said no, right? And they said, forget it. Like that's, she might not have thought about it like that, but it's like, what if we didn't have Wordsworth to do the Romantic Manifesto? I mean, excuse me, to do lyrical ballads in 1798 with Coleridge. What if, then you wouldn't maybe have a Keats, and you maybe wouldn't have a Coleridge, and you wouldn't have a Hugo in the same way, right? Like that the way he looked at the world might have changed everything and by not doing it, right? And that, I think that's a dramatic event that she come up with. And then from that is a pretty clear theme that she can come with, the role of the mind, in everyday life. There are writers, if you read books today on writing.
Now it's
like a Stephen King type person.
Where are we at in the process now? I'm
just saying generally, like a lot of people recommend not having a theme, because otherwise you'll write like Ayn Rand. Like that's how they put it sometimes, which is didactic. So this is one attack people will have about her and work of people who follow her, is that it comes across very didactic.
Oh, when I think of it,
don't have that's what propaganda is.
No. I mean it's not even that. It's a theme is like, you could have a theme called oceans.
No, I understand. You
could have a theme outer space. You could have
I'm with you. I'm just telling you how, if you read books, like the books that I've read, like I think Stephen Pressfield would say something like, you don't want to start with what you want to say. You want to understand that later in the process. You want to start with like a character, an event, an incident, something you read in the newspaper.
Well, but the thing of it is that, again,
that's their
anything
advice.
That you point at and you think this is important, there's the seed of a story idea that is appealing to you, and that's what gets you motivated to stay with that. There's something about that color, that texture, that look in that eye, that way of interaction, and that tone of voice that gets you interested in.
Well, but then the challenge is making it not subjective, because that if it's just about your feelings about it, why should anybody else care?
That's where the technique of writing and building around that comes into play.
So another part of the writing process, for instance, may be, so you have your initial idea.
And by the way, I wouldn't be interested in reading a writer that wasn't convinced emotionally of every comma in their work.
So maybe the after the pre-writing and you're taking notes and you're doing things, there needs to be an evaluation of, is this marketable? Is this something that's worthwhile?
No. That's
so.
Completely. That's.
I think it's very important.
You know what?
To making money is important.
The question, but we're talking about writing as a process. Now
you're
talking about
kill a project and move on.
Well, I mean, if the only purpose in writing was to, make money, then a lot of the greatest of Eastern and Western literature would be for naught.
Yeah, but we live in a free market, so you have to do that. That's part of the challenge of a free market.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the free market, doesn't impose any kind of aesthetic obligations on you, other than to let people, be free to pursue their.
We'll move on from that.
I think that's really interesting, because I think that would be a total diversion at the point that we're talking about, to be considering. I mean, it's an important thing, but I don't think it's a thing to consider in the course of actually writing the work that we're doing. Now, that's a much more narrow thing. You were bringing in something that's important and not to be poo-pooed, but it may not be the thing that is the most timely and important when you're trying to figure out what is important to you and what's motivating.
I understand that.
So that's what I'm just trying.
On that. What I'm saying is,
because that could be a showstopper.
Sometimes it needs to be. You need to move on. Because if you don't,
if you have an important thing to say about life.
But that's the question. Okay, so maybe you just don't like the term marketing. So
I love marketing.
The question is it is what you're thinking in your head and what's important to you truly important to everybody, or can you make it important to everybody? So Ayn Rand made Atlas Shrugged important to a lot of people who aren't, and I think a lot of people who are not creative people truly individual creative react very
Actually,
negatively.
I think
to her
Ayn
book.
Rand could have given a tinker's damn about what other people thought about her book in the course of
But she
writing
wanted
it.
people to buy it.
But the basic a roadmap of purchasability is clarity and a good story, and that I think she was aware of.
So you think that any work that's clear is going to sell?
No, I don't think that's
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
That's the point at all.
It's-
I'm just saying that the issue of sales is not something that is germane to the writing process that we're mapping out here. We can talk about sales at a later point, and properly so.
Okay. So there's the observation phase that's always happening, the pre-writing, note taking, and then there's the drafting.
Now,
And
I
let's
have
just
to
move through this real quick so
well,
we can, because
I have to
go
and
for it.
drafting.
Yeah.
And I'll use a metaphor that Ayn Rand used, godlike. You need to be like a world creator.
Visible everywhere
God.
and nowhere, something like that.
You need to be the person that is in the driver's seat. And when you, and this is my metaphor because this is how I have approached the thing. You need to have like an internal turntable going. And when you start writing, you drop the needle on the turntable and you just go with what you have. You just let everything.
That's where the subconscious is in the driver's seat.
Yes. And
just
that,
like kind of, you don't edit, you don't like cross out stuff, you just go.
Right.
That's
I mean,
all
you
do.
know enough that you're, in the 20th century rather than the 10th century, or you're dealing with, English culture and language rather than French. Those things in advance. But when you actually start the writing itself, after you've outlined, after you've taken notes, after you've mulled this over, then the glory of writing is actually producing effective sentences that are getting across a clear meaning.
Well, in the drafting, you may not even focus on that. Like, I think that comes later because otherwise you may be editing yourself while you're writing.
No. I'm just saying that the joy is actually, starting to build the thing.
So we may have different focuses when we write the draft. Mm-hmm. For me, it's I have, a scene that I've set or something in my mind I want to get on paper. Mm-hmm. And I just want to get that scene out no matter how crappy it looks on paper at first. And then I try to make it pretty. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, you could look at it that way.
I don't like to edit while I write. But
I guess what I'm saying is no. I think what she did, she
I didn't think so.
She said, "I'm ready to write. It's time to write. Just do it. Be godlike."
Yeah,
and then come back the next day.
Make it look pretty, or make it look nice and clear, and because mine is not clear when it comes out at all. None of my work. I mean, most of my work is not.
Well, it's interesting.
Maybe
I find that the moment that the needle drops and the music starts.
I mean, there have been some.
It's
works.
like so. It's such. It's.
Well, that must be you.
There's no better place to be.
Now, that's not what I said. Of course, I agree. It feels good.
Yeah, and therefore, but
it's clear in my head, not necessarily on the paper yet.
Well, the clarity is
that's what editing is for. To me, editing is writing. Editing is part of it's not drafting.
It's a type of writing. I mean, in music, I would say it's like improvisation. It's like composition is slow improvisation, and improvisation is fast composition. It's this kind of process that can take place at two sides of the work week. When you gush and you're godlike in your literary writing, and then in the next day or later in the week, when you go back and review the work neutrally, indifferently to the experience of getting it out, and then just pay close attention to that thing that you've produced to create clarity and to create effective communication. And that comes in another stage of the writing process. And it can be, a compliment to the enjoyment that you had, or it can be misery.
So for me, like I like to draft long form by hand.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I like to do that is then when I type it, it allows me to kind of edit as I type to make it clearer. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's not clear at all. And so that's very clear. It's good. I like that's a great sentence. It just came to me in the moment. It felt great. So to me, that's how my process works for writing anything. There was one exception. I actually I did a Benjamin Franklin method of writing, of learning how to write from great writers. So he had this view that one of the ways to improve your writing was to ingest the content of another person, like the style. And what he would do is he would actually circle several words in a sentence of a, so he'd get there's a particular writer, I'm forgetting his name right now. He wrote Cato, a Tragedy, that was Washington's favorite work. But he would take some journal writing or some beautiful story he loved, and he would, sentence by sentence, he would take one sentence and circle like 3 or 4 words, and then he would copy those words next to it, just those 3 words. And he'd do that with every sentence. And then he would go in and rewrite it with those words in it and then his own words. And in that way, and of course he had read it a couple times.
Interesting.
And in that way he kind of absorbed some of it and then put it in his own words. So I actually did that with a Hawthorne short story that I forgot to look up the name because I've read it a million times. But now whenever I think of that Hawthorne short story, I think of my work. Yeah, I work in because I literally spent 6 months. It took me 6 months. It took me long hours and hours and hours of work. And it's not even that long. The story I wrote is called The Abysmal Dismal Mr. Boomerang. And I literally circled in every sentence 3 to 5 words, and I put them together separately, and then I rewrote it section by section, and I tried to keep it structurally like him, like Hawthorne, so I could understand what he was doing in his methodology. And I think it's actually, in terms of literature, by far my favorite and my best work in a lot of ways. And I think it's partly because, or mostly because, I structured it so heavily on Hawthorne, and it taught me a lot about how he uses sentences to convey high moral themes, very intently, and he's conscious of this. Hawthorne's probably one of my favorite writers, especially short stories. And so it's a great
recent pleasure for me is reading Hawthorne.
Good. Yeah. He's incredible, and there's it's something you can revisit over and over again in a way that there's always new insights to be made.
I would say that from what I'm hearing from you, one important thing is to, apart from the any stage of the writing process that we're outlining here, is just to make sure that in doing writing, in approaching writing, you know what you like, and you highlight and pick out things that are good examples of writing, and figure
you not
out
only know what you like, but
why they are the kind of favorites that they are for you.
Yeah,
and to break it down, and
to spend. So Ayn Rand was. And I think all great literature writers, effective fiction writers, even if they break away from the mold, are extremely like they could each be literary professors, right? Like they're that knowledgeable about literature and about great fiction. Does that make sense? So
they certainly know they're good.
Taste.
They're wide readers.
Like I think Shoshana Milgram once said, she's a knowledgeable person about Ayn Rand. She once said that you can do worse than to take...
Professor of literature.
She's also a professor of literature. You could do worse than to take reading recommendations from Ayn Rand, right? And which Shoshana gives a lot of recommendations that Rand gave, and said even if Rand wasn't right about everything, you could do worse in life than take literary. And the point is, the
takeaway from that, I think, that is important is know what you like. Period.
No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, you need to know what you like, and to know what you like, you need to read wide and deep.
Yep.
Into literature, or if you're going to be a literary writer.
Right.
And it's astonishing to me how shallow people's writing or reading is who want to be fiction writers. It's astonishing to me. Even in people want to be Hollywood script writers. And did you ever see that movie America's Sweethearts with John Cusack and Billy Crystal?
No.
Oh man, really?
Nope.
I thought you were a Hollywood dude.
Give me another movie.
But anyway, Billy Crystal says to this young kid who wants to be, he's a promoter, he's a PR guy in Hollywood. It's about Hollywood sweethearts, but they break up, and this Billy Crystal has to get them back together for this movie before it goes out so they can sell it. But there's this kid who follows him around, and Billy Crystal's constantly making movie references about, from the 1930s and 40s and 50s and 60s, all these and the other kids, like always looking at him like, what are you talking about? And then at one point, Billy Crystal just looks at him and says, you know what, kid, don't tell anyone you're in the movie business. And I think that's so true. It's like, you're trying to write and you don't know these writers. Like, what is going through your head? I don't understand. And it's the same thing. I see this even with fiction, like, people want to write scripts. It's like, you haven't looked at, the 70s. Like, you don't know what happened in the 70s writing wise. You don't know what happened in the 40s and 50s. And like, you've never seen or read a Hitchcock film.
Well,
like, what is going on?
I mean, it goes to the wider point.
And but that's how you develop taste.
You have to be an observer of the world. And the world is,
and I think that's a good point that we have to make here.
Observe the world.
Observe the world. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a wonderful place.
It's a wonderful place. So any thoughts on your writing process to finish up? I mean, we've covered Rand's writing process pretty heavily and how to think about it. We've covered Wordsworth and Franklin.
One thing I am happy to say is that when I started this journey, it was a formal decision when I was 16. I had this idea in my head that I wouldn't be any good until I was in the latter part of my life. And the reason,
had that feeling too.
And I said, and I was, at the time I was close to a lot of people that were going into Hollywood and going, actors and actresses, and they were banking on a certain, physical state that they were in at the time. They were youthful, beautiful, et cetera, and they were going to try to pursue and, become a movie stars. And I knew a lot of people, and I knew some people that became movie stars, from that age. But I never was really pulled in that direction because I always thought that the kind of work that I wanted to do required a lot of experience and simple observation of life.
Yeah.
And that is something that, in my early attempts at fiction, and was quite clear. I hadn't lived enough. I hadn't formed enough judgments. I hadn't peered closely at enough things to write interesting things about.
Yeah.
And because I was a hyphenate and I was interested in music, and music came so fast and so furious and so without any kind of hesitation for me in writing it, that I, saw a kind of interesting foil for this, literary ambition that I had, because I wanted to combine music and text, libretto and song. And the two have nudged each other for decades, and I really feel that this is my time. Fortunately, I don't have to wait until I'm 85, as I thought when I was 16, because there was a British symphonist that I had modeled as the archetype of the wise older composer, but he didn't do so well. His music wasn't that good, but the fact that he was writing full symphonies in his mid-80s was inspiring to me. So live a good, thorough life as long as you live it, and then you'll have the material to do your art.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I don't think Ayn Rand was, when she wrote The Fountainhead, it was 43 when she published. Mm-hmm. So she was 38 when she published that.
Right.
So it took her that long to really get it down. And then, of course, Atlas Shrugged she did in her 40s and 50s. Throughout her whole 40s and early 50s.
And she had this idea.
Just to have perspective.
Yeah, she had this idea that your 40th
she wasn't
birthday,
successful before that either.
Your 40th birthday was your philosopher's birthday.
Yeah.
You really wouldn't have enough experience with life to fully grasp what it would take to cash out your early philosophical views in action, in actual practice, with conviction. And I think that
that's true.
there is a certain amount of that applies to the deployment of your observations in art.
I agree. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed peering at things.
Peering. We did a lot of peering today.
We did a lot of peering.
We're peers in a way here.
Yeah, that's...
So it's two types of peering, or double peering.
Double peers. And we, so go to troubadourmag.com. We'll host it there. We'll host it on Facebook. And I will put up an audio version as well, but hopefully you guys will watch because that's a big part of it. We'll also put up the manuscript and links to the things that we talked about.
Yes.
And, if you have questions, please email us at kirkbarbera@troubadourmag.com. So we'll see you next time, guys.
Take care.